recent Democratic debate revealed to us that each candidate believes in global warming, which leads to climate change. But the truth is that global warming and climate change is an absolute hoax. We will discuss the real agenda behind the global warming, climate change propaganda on today's edition of Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on Earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Politics and Religion. I'm Dave Robbins, and I thank you for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to be talking about climate change and global warming. You hear it all the time in the news, and a lot of times it just passes you by. You don't even understand what they're talking about, all the different things that's going on. A lot of people think it's just a fear-mongering by the world government and global elitists. But I wanted to kind of drill down things we've been hearing recently in the Democratic debate especially, and kind of get to behind the scenes. What's really going on? What's the agenda that they're trying to push talking about climate change and global warming? Because it's easily proven that global warming, which leads to climate change, is an absolute hoax. So why are they pushing it if it's not even true? So that's what we're going to talk about on today's program. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 8, it describes the end-time one world government and the leader of that entity, which will be the Antichrist. So in just the near future, there's going to be a one world government established. We know that from the prophecies of the Bible. So with the way that prophecies are coming to pass right now, letting us know that we're in the end time, it is possible that the next sitting president of the United States could be at the helm of the most powerful nation on earth during these prophesied events, the Sixth Trumpet War, the beginning of the final 7 years, and the transition of the entire world to being ruled by this one world government. So you're sitting there, why would you want to be president of the United States? Who would you want to be president of the United States at that time? That's the question. If looking at all of the candidates, the 20 or 21 maybe that are left, I think maybe Webb just dropped out today, who would you want to be president during that time? That is why this next election is absolutely so critical, because that president, whoever's elected in about a year from now, could be the president that's sitting at the helm of the United States during those prophesied events. So you might be asking yourself, well, why is global warming and climate change so important in the presidential, with a presidential campaign and a future candidate? What should you be looking for? Well, there's a plethora of issues and stances that you should be looking for about each candidate. You should make sure you really do your homework and educate yourself. But I'm going to deal with one today, and it's climate change. So I want to go over a couple articles recently just to kind of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll dive off into the debate, the Democratic debate that was just held, and look at some of their responses to the climate change question, and then we'll get into the real agenda. So a couple of articles just to kind of set the stage. A recent article that I read, Climate Change is a UN-led hoax to create a new world order. This was from the Australian Prime Minister's advisor. Maurice Newman, a chairman of the Prime Minister Tony Abbott's Business Advisory Council in Australia, said the UN is using false models which show sustained temperature increases because it wants to end democracy and impose an authoritarian rule. It's a well-kept secret, but 95% of the climate models, we are told, prove the link between human CO2 emissions and catastrophic global warming have been found after nearly 2 decades of temperature stasis to be in error. The real agenda is concentrated political authority. Global warming is simply the hook. That's the fear-mongering. That's the fear. Get everybody in fear mode, and then they can impose this authoritarian rule over everybody, he said, adding that the UN is against capitalism and freedom and wants to create a new world order. Well, what he's saying is absolutely true. That is the agenda that's behind global warming and climate change, is the United Nations has chose that fear-mongering tactic to impose global governance and wealth redistribution around the world. The second article was France's top weatherman sparks storm over a book questioning climate change. This was in the Telegraph. In a promotional video, Mr. Verdier said, "Every night I address 5 million French people." He's the number one weatherman in France. 5 million people to talk to you about the wind, the clouds, the sun. And yet there is something very important that I haven't been able to tell you on air because it's neither the time nor the place to do so. He added, "We are hostage to a planetary scandal over climate change, a war machine whose aim is to keep us in fear." According to Mr. Verdier, top climate scientists who often rely on state funding have been manipulated and politicized. He specifically challenges the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC as it's normally known, saying that they blatantly erased data that went against their overall conclusions and cast doubt on the accuracy of their climate models. What's shameful is this pressure placed on us to say that if we don't hurry, it will be the apocalypse. Keep us in fear mode. He added, saying that climate democracy means leaders are seeking to force changes to suit their own political timetables. As a result of his new book, Climate Investigation, Mr. Verdier was reportedly sent on a forced holiday for releasing the book, accusing top climatologists of taking the world hostage. Well, both of these articles that I just read to you about this hidden agenda behind global warming and climate change are absolutely true. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, because they would like to hush these people up and not let them tell the truth about what's really going on, and their push for a global government and wealth redistribution, communistic, socialistic principles that they're pushing, they're just getting you in fear mode. And when you get in fear mode, when people get afraid, they'll allow things to happen in the name of security that they never would before. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, because remember, the Bible prophesies that in the end time, there's going to be a world government formed, and they're going to try to enforce their edicts upon the entire world. This is one of the ways that they're doing it. This is a huge precursor to that event. So I want to talk to you today about let's get off into the Democratic debate, climate change, because these are presidential candidates. One of these people, and maybe one of the Republicans, could be the president here in about a year from now. So I want to know what do they believe concerning some of these different issues. And of course, we're talking today about climate change. So if we get off into it, you're looking at the Rhode Island Governor, Lincoln Chafee. What did he say during the debate about climate change? Does he believe in it or does he not? He states, "I want to address climate change, a real threat to our planet." Anderson Cooper asked him the question, "Which enemy are you most proud of, political enemy?" Mr. Chafee replied, "I guess the coal lobby. I've worked hard for climate change, and I want to work with the coal lobby. But in my time in the Senate, I tried to bring them to the table so that we could address carbon dioxide. I'm proud to be at odds with the coal lobby. I want to address climate change as a real threat to our planet." So it's obvious Mr. Chafee believes in global warming that causes climate change. Former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley stated, and we must square our shoulders to the great challenge of climate change and make this threat our opportunity. The future is what we make of it. We are all in this together. And the question in this election is whether you and I still have the ability to give our kids a better future. Anderson Cooper asked him the question, what is the greatest national security threat to the United States? O'Malley replied, I believe that nuclear Iran remains the biggest threat, along with the threat of ISIL, and climate change, of course, makes cascading threats even more. So, of course, here it is. O'Malley believes that one of the largest security threats to the United States is climate change, and climate change is an absolute hoax. What does Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, think? Well, she stated, and taking the opportunity posed by climate change to grow our economy. But I have been on the forefront of dealing with climate change, starting in 2009, when President Obama and I crashed a meeting with the Chinese and got them to sign up to the first international agreement to combat climate change that they had ever joined. When we met in Copenhagen in 2009, and literally President Obama and I were hunting for the Chinese, going throughout this huge convention center because we knew we had to get them to agree to something, because there will be no effective efforts against climate change unless China and India join with the rest of the world. They told us they'd left for the airport. We found out they were having a secret meeting. We marched up, we broke in, and we said, we've been looking all over the place for you. Let's sit down and talk about what we need to do. And we did come up with a first international agreement that China has signed. Thanks to President Obama's leadership, it's now gone much further. So it's obvious Hillary Clinton believes in global warming, which leads to climate change. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont stated, today the scientific community is virtually unanimous. Climate change, which is that's absolutely a falsehood. They're not unanimous. Climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. And we have a moral responsibility to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and leave this planet a habitable planet for our children and our grandchildren. Anderson Cooper asked him the question, so what is the greatest national security threat in your eyes? Well, Sanders replied, the scientific community is telling us that if we do not address the global crisis of climate change, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our grandchildren may well not be habitable. This is a major crisis. Anderson Cooper said, Senator Sanders, are you tougher on climate change than Secretary Clinton? Sanders replied, well, I will tell you this. I believe, and Pope Francis made this point, this is a moral issue. The scientists are telling us that we need to move extremely boldly. I am proud that along with Senator Barbara Boxer, a few years ago, we introduced the first piece of climate change legislation which called for a tax on carbon. And let me tell you that nothing is going to happen unless we're prepared to deal with the climate finance reform. So when we get back from the break, I'll continue on through the debate and we'll get into the agenda of global warming and climate change. Join me when we come back.
The seeds of the Battle of Armageddon were sown on November 29, 2012. The seeds sown on that historic day are in the process of producing a dreadful harvest. The Bible actually describes it as the harvest of Armageddon. Learn the story of what happened on November 29, 2012, when the seeds were sown for the world's final battle, the growth of which are the events that will occur on the journey to where the story ends, at the reaping of the harvest of Armageddon. Call 1-800-END-TIME to order this important lesson.
Take your understanding of the end time to a new level with our Outlines and Quizzes workbook. This workbook accompanies our Understanding the End Time 14 lesson series. As you watch each lesson, follow along with the outlines, then take a quiz and check your answers at the end. These are all contained in one convenient workbook so you can study as well as teach prophecy wherever you go. Use it as a study guide to cement main points and scriptures that Irvin teaches in each lesson. It's also a great tool if you host an end-time Bible study. Help your group solidify what they're learning by getting a copy for each person to follow along with the video and then to take home and study on their own. Get the workbook by calling 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and be ready to instruct many as the scripture says.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. I'm going through the Democratic debate, and I'm showing you how different candidates responded to global warming and climate change, because we know that it's a hoax, but most of them believe that global warming leads to climate change. So Anderson Cooper asked Bernie Sanders a question, and the rest of his answer was, because the fossil fuel industry is funding the Republican Party, which denies the reality of climate change and certainly is not prepared to go forward aggressively, this is a moral issue. He keeps saying this is a moral issue. We have got to be extremely aggressive in working with China, India, and Russia. So my question to you, everybody listening, is what does Mr. Sanders mean when he says that he and Pope Francis agree that climate change is a moral issue? Well, let's look at it. The rights of the environment. You've heard that in the news lately. So in an all-out effort to get those with a religious affiliation to buy into the global warming and climate change scheme, Pope Francis, which Bernie Sanders referred to, has gone one step beyond delving into the politics of the issue and made it a religious matter or a moral matter. During his United Nations speech, Pope Francis stated, "First, it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist. Any harm done to the environment, therefore, is harm done to humanity." Pope Francis actually believes that the environment has rights, just like humans have rights. Now think about that, turning it into a religious issue, a moral issue. I didn't fully understand this concept and how the Pope was using this theory to promote global government until I referred back to his encyclical of the Holy Father Francis on the care for our common home. I read that entire encyclical. It's like 180 some pages, and I read it actually a few times to make sure I could drill down really what he was saying. His obvious goal here is to influence the world's population to buy into the man-made global warming and climate change hoax, just like Bernie Sanders. In order to do this, Pope Francis refers to now here comes the moral religious part, refers to the earth, sun, moon, stars, wind, fire, and water as literally, this is what they believe, as literally part of our human family. You say, well, how in the world does he do that? Well, in his encyclical, and you can read it, it's online, in his encyclical, Pope Francis published a hymn or a song written by Saint Francis of Assisi, who is the inspiration for the name of the current Pope, Pope Francis of Assisi. In the hymn, Saint Francis refers to members of the environment as Sir Brother Moon, Brother Sun, Sister Moon, and the stars, Brother Wind, Sister Water, and Brother Fire. Pope Francis then says everything is related, and we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love God has for each of His creatures, and which also unites us in fond affection with Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother River, and Mother Earth, parts of our human family. You see what's happening here. Therefore, if you pollute the air, you are sinning against a family member. If you abuse the land, you are committing sin against Mother Earth, because she has rights just like humans. Do you see how subtle the message is here? The earth, sun, moon, stars, wind, fire, and water are actually being considered as part of our family. Therefore, if we sin against the family, if we harm them in any way, we're sinning against the environment. Some would say the word sin, Dave, come on, the word sin is a little harsh. However, in an effort to drive the sin against the environment message home to religious affiliates, Pope Francis included a quote in the encyclical from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew of the Greek Orthodox Church. It states, "For human beings to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for human beings to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its natural forest or destroying its wetlands, for human beings to contaminate the earth's waters, its lands, its air, and its life, these are sins." Sin. It's not a harsh enough language for them to use in their encyclical. So, is this true? They've turned it into a religious issue. Religious people understand sin. And so when they say the sins against the environment are sins leading to, will your soul go to hell if you do this? So, is this true, what they've stated in the encyclical? No, it's not true at all. Genesis 1:26 states, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth." Dominion over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Almighty God gave man dominion over the environment. He did not say we were equal to the environment, or that we would commit sin by giving off carbon emissions or cutting down a few trees. It's not sin. But yet, when you go back to what Bernie Sanders says, he says that he agrees with Pope Francis' belief system that global warming and climate change is a moral or a religious issue. So, you say, well, man, that's way out there. Look, do your research and read the encyclical. You'll see exactly what I'm saying. And what they're doing, it's a absolute hoax. There's no such thing as global warming that leads to climate change that is man-made. Man is not causing that. That's what these guys are pushing here, and that we need to do something globally. We need to have a global management system of this, which they're saying is the United Nations. So, finally, former Senator Jim Webb of Virginia, which I learned just before coming on the program, has dropped out of the Democratic race. He was given a question from Ann Bettis. As a young person, this is her question, as a young person, I'm very concerned about climate change and how it will affect my future. As a presidential candidate, what would you do to address climate change? Well, Mr. Webb stated, well, the question really is, how are we going to solve energy problems here in the global environment if you really want to address climate change? And when I was in the Senate, I was an all-of-the-above energy voter. We introduced legislation to bring in alternative energy as well as nuclear power. I'm a strong proponent of nuclear power. It is safe, it's clean, and really, we're not going to solve climate change simply by the laws here. We've done a good job in this country since 1970. If you look at China and India, they're the greatest polluters in the world. 15 out of the 20 most polluted cities in the world are in one of those two countries. We need to solve this in a global way. There needs to be a global management. It's a global problem, and I have been very strong on doing that. The agreements, the so-called agreements that we have had with China, are illusory in terms of the immediate requirements of the Chinese government itself. So let's solve this problem in an international way. And then we really will have a way to address climate change. Now here's a question for you. Since it is real easily proven that global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax, it's not happening at all, that's human caused, then what is really going on here? What is the real agenda behind the global warming and climate change hoax? Well, global warming and climate change is a hoax which is designed to scare us, to keep us in fear mode into accepting a world government. Do you remember what President Barack Obama said at the Democratic Convention in 2012? He said, and yes, my plan will continue to reduce the carbon pollution that is heating our planet. That's not true at all, because climate change is not a hoax. More droughts and floods and wildfires are not a joke. They're a threat to our children's future, and in this election, you can do something about it. The problem is, he got voted back in to be president again. And guess what? There's more restrictive laws, I mean very restrictive laws, on the United States and coming from the United Nations on climate change right now. They just, in the Sustainable Development Goals that they just signed on to here just a few weeks ago, one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals is devoted to climate change. Everyone on earth would agree with Mr. Obama that climate change is not a hoax. I would agree with that. Actually, the climate has changed every day since God created the earth. Today it may be sunny and 70 degrees, while tomorrow it might rain and drop into the 50s. Bingo! The climate just changed. However, it is Mr. Obama's definition of climate change that is simply not true. He boldly proclaims that carbon pollution or carbon dioxide, CO2, is heating our planet, which is resulting in the increase in droughts and floods, wildfires that threaten the future of our children. Well, seeing the overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that has been given over the years that totally disproves the theory of man-made global warming, one has to wonder why the president or anyone else would even bring it up. All the Democratic presidential candidates in the Democratic debate, why would you even bring it up? It's a hoax. Because they have an agenda that they're pushing. So it seems that for decades, global elitists have been spinning tales of an impending ice age or catastrophic global warming in an effort to keep the masses in a perpetual state of fear. But now that global cooling and global warming has been so easily disproven, politicians and their on-staff scientists have resorted to promoting fear of man-made climate change. Global warming hadn't worked, so now we're saying climate change. Now they can blame every hurricane, earthquake, drought, flood, or snowstorm on human beings. So listen, folks, God has been regulating the temperature of this planet for thousands of years. The very idea that a government entity can control the weather or the temperature of the planet by regulating the amount of CO2 that we emit into the atmosphere, that's preposterous. But that is precisely the message that Mr. Obama and his cohorts at the United Nations continue to spread. You do realize that the United States, European Union, and Japan, along with many other developed countries, have already given the United Nations billions of dollars to fight man-made climate change, and it's all a hoax. That's right. The problem with world leaders spreading the message that man-made global warming is heating up the planet, which in turn causes all sorts of climate change catastrophes, is that none of it's true. That's right, America. It's all a lie. Science has already debunked the man-made global warming scam, and yet Mr. Obama emphatically claims that it's true. So what are the realities? Is global warming man-made? And if not, why are politicians, world leaders, scientists, and global dreamers continuing to lie about it? When we get back in the next segment after the break, I'll get into, is global warming man-made? And I'll prove you that it's not. So join me after the break, and we've got a good session coming up in the next segment.
In the space of just 1 week in Paris, France, 8 synagogues were attacked. One was firebombed by a 400-strong mob. Additionally, a kosher supermarket and pharmacy were smashed and looted. The crowds chanted, "Death to the Jews," and slit the Jews' throats. One banner at the demonstrations read, "Israel, hell." There's some more evidence concerning the Great Tribulation and the fact that we actually have entered into the prelude to the Great Tribulation. One person said it's like the 1930s all over again.
Go to endtime.com and under Irvin's Thoughts, click the Great Tribulation to watch this video.
Jesus said that there would be a particular generation that would see specific things take place, and this would be the people that would see his second coming to the earth. The big question is, can we know this generation? Jesus talked about it in Matthew 24. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and put out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Jesus said, when you see these things, what things was he talking about? In the DVD, This Generation Shall Not Pass, Irvin discusses the events that must occur that will let us know the generation that shall not pass until the second coming of Jesus Christ. Get this enlightening lesson by calling 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. We're going through the climate change hoax that's being promulgated by many of the leading politicians, and some of those that are vying for the next president of the United States spot. So I've went through and told you some of their different stances and different things, and so I'm proving to you now in this segment that global warming is a hoax. Is global warming man-made? The entire global warming climate change theory hinges on the premise that humans, through the emission of greenhouse gases, mainly CO2, are causing the temperature of the earth to rise. As a result, the climate changes, which leads to all sorts of weather catastrophes, such as snowstorms, droughts, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, etc. The global warming alarmists contend that the more CO2 humans emit into the atmosphere, the more the planet heats up. They frantically warn that if this is not stopped, we will destroy the planet. So, is any of this really happening? Well, the answer is no. None of this is true. As a matter of fact, most scientists do not agree with this man-made global warming theory, but they've been hushed and have offered sound scientific data debunking the myth. Let me give you just a few of the many proofs that have been provided. So here's proof number one. I'll give you three of them. Proof number one, temperature increases CO2, not vice versa. So, in his now famous global warming documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, former Vice President Al Gore produced a graph depicting the variations of temperature and levels of CO2 in the atmosphere over the last 650,000 years, according to computer-generated models. In the graph, Mr. Gore strategically separated the two lines. You understand a graph, he separated them and placed the temperature line below that of the CO2 line. This was done in an attempt to create the delusion that when the amount of CO2 emission increased, the temperature automatically began to climb as well. Mr. Gore's obvious conclusion was that global warming was being generated by mankind's modern industrial development, which has increased the amount of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. As a solution, Mr. Gore advocated global laws. There's the agenda behind all this that would revolutionize our lifestyle, redistribute the wealth of the world through this proposed cap and trade legislation, and establish a system of global governance that would end national sovereignty. However, after experts analyzed the graph by placing the CO2 line directly over the temperature line, they proved conclusively that CO2 levels had risen only as a result of the increase in temperature, not the other way around. A closer look at the graph revealed that the lag time between temperature and CO2 levels changing was at times as much as 800 years. The temperature went up before the CO2 rise did. This one proof alone has destroyed the entire basis for the global warming theory. An increased amount of CO2 does not result in global warming. Actually, the opposite is true. So the second proof, CO2 has risen at a record rate over a decade, but global temperatures have remained the same over the last 2 decades. So according to an article by James Taylor in Forbes magazine, the U.S. Department of Energy revealed in its estimates of global carbon dioxide emissions for the year 2010 that since 2001, carbon emissions had increased 33% globally, yet the Earth's temperatures had remained the same for over an entire decade. Even though CO2 emissions were climbing, the temperature stayed the same. He went on to state the fact that global temperatures are not rising despite such a significant increase in carbon dioxide emissions provides validation of skeptical arguments, not a cause for heightened alarm. So don't be afraid of this, folks. Don't let these politicians spread these lies and make you afraid. It's not true. CO2 emissions do not cause temperatures to rise. Proof number 3, Dr. Michael Mann's infamous hockey stick graph. It was all over the news at that time. Dr. Michael Mann's graph showing multi-proxy temperatures of the northern hemisphere. He had a graph showing the different temperatures for the past 1,000 years. It appeared in a third assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC again, by gathering data from ice cores and tree ring samples. Mr. Mann's graph supposedly proved that the Earth's air temperatures were fairly stable for about 900 years and then began an unprecedented climb in the 20th century, which made the lines on the graph look like a hockey stick. This increase in temperature was then attributed to man-made greenhouse gas emissions from the industrialization of the world. The chart was widely accepted in the global warming circles and even made an appearance in Mr. Gore's An Inconvenient Truth movie, the global warming movie. However, there were some major scientific errors with the chart. Number 1, the ice core and tree ring samples were taken from the northern hemisphere, which hardly provided a true global temperature reading for that 1,000-year period. Number 2, the graph totally dismisses the medieval warming period from 800 AD to 1300 AD and the Little Ice Age from 1300 AD to 1900 AD, which are 2 climate events that are widely accepted in the scientific community. He just left those out over the last 1,000 years. The graph was further debunked by when Keith Briffa of the East Anglia University Climate Research Unit presented tree ring data calculations that revealed a decline in temperature beginning in 1961. This new data prompted the ClimateGate email from CRU Director Philip Jones to Michael Mann and others, which stated, "I've just completed Mike's Nature Journal trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years. And from 1961 for Keith's to hide the decline in global temperatures." This hide the decline remark was an obvious cover-up for Keith Briffa's actual data that showed the decline in global temperatures and placed yet another nail in the global warming coffin. So there's 3 absolute proofs. I have tons. I've got books in my office of whole books on different proofs that the global warming, which leads to climate change, is a scam. So I've just given you 3 today for the sake of time. So in the aftermath of this ClimateGate scandal and in a last-ditch effort to keep the global warming hoax alive, global warming alarmists attempted to explain away the medieval warming period by stating that perhaps there were isolated areas of warming. However, there were too many easy-to-understand proofs. For example, during the medieval warming period, the Vikings actually sailed in waters that are now frozen today. The Vikings took advantage of the ice-free seas to colonize Greenland and other outlying lands of the far north. So around 1000 AD, the climate was sufficiently warm for the north of Newfoundland to support a Viking colony that came to be called Vinland. because of the fine grapes and wines that were produced there. These areas are under ice today, and they farmed them back then. This provides absolute proof, just another proof, that it was warmer back then than it is now, and there were no factories or SUVs putting off carbon emissions at that time. So you can't overlook all these proofs. There's so many more proofs. I've given you a few, but it's a hoax. But yet you've got major politicians who are supposed to be very educated that are saying, we need to conquer climate change. It's going to be a major catastrophe. We won't be able to leave our grandkids a place to live. It's all a hoax. They have an agenda that they're pushing. So what's the conclusion? Well, global warming was not man-made then, and it was not man-made back in the Vikings' day, and it's not man-made now. What do scientists say? I want to give you some validated proof, because there's a lot of people say, well, the scientific community agrees on global warming and climate change. It's not true. On January 22nd, 2012, USA Today published an article titled, Report, 97% of scientists say man-made climate change is real. In the article, author Doyle Rice stated nearly all the experts agree that it is very likely that anthropogenic or man-made greenhouse gases have been responsible for most of the unequivocal warming of the Earth's average global temperature in the second half of the 20th century. As for the 3% of the scientists who remain unconvinced, 3% is what they're saying, the study found that their average expertise is far below that of their colleagues. Is this true? No. Capital N-O. No. I want you to hear what a few of those below average scientists have to say about man-made global warming and climate change. Will Harper, Princeton University physicist, former director of the energy research at the Department of Energy, stated, I had the privilege of being fired by Al Gore since I refused to go along with his alarmism. He fired him. I have spent a long research career studying physics that is closely related to greenhouse effect. Fears about man-made global warming are unwarranted and are not based on good science. The Earth's climate is changing now, as it always has. There is no evidence that the changes differ in any qualitative way from those of the past. So what you can see here is a very, very reputable science who has had years of experience say, look, when Al Gore started trying to push these different things, I was in his camp, and when I wouldn't agree with his alarmism, he fired me. And this guy's very reputable. So you say, well, man, this just doesn't make sense. I thought that the earth, we were causing the earth to heat up, and that there's going to be all these cataclysmic events, the more tornadoes, the more earthquakes, and all these different things are a result of global warming and climate change. None of it's true. The climate has been changing since God created the earth, and God regulates the temperatures. The earth is not going to be destroyed by a flood. God said it wouldn't be. He promised in His Word. He's regulated the temperatures ever since He created the earth, and He will regulate them all the way to the end. You don't have to worry about it. So, before we're going into a next break, before I get into the last segment, in our last magazine, we've written huge articles, in the last several magazines, written a lot of articles on climate change. If you haven't subscribed to Endtime Magazine, do so and educate yourself on these different climate change issues and many other issues. You've got to educate yourself to be able to make good decisions, especially in this upcoming presidential debate. Join me when we come back.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime Magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know. if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine did in my life. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-ENDTIME and get your subscription today.
Watch the prophecies come alive on End of the Age every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Time on TBN. If you're wondering questions like, why is anti-Semitism rising in our world again? What are the 7 trumpets? And what about the Antichrist? Where will he come from? What will happen at the second coming of Christ? And what is even my place in the end time? All these questions are answered on our End of the Age television program. You can watch it on TBN, the Church Channel, Daystar, and more. Call us at 1-800-ENDTIME to find what station End of the Age is on in your area. That's 1-800-363-8463. Or go to endtime.com and click the broadcast link.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. I'm going through and giving you proofs that the global warming climate change is a scam. It's a lie. It's not true. And there was an article in the USA Today that said, hey, 97% of the scientific community agree global warming climate change is true. And the 3% that don't agree, they're just slough-offs. They quit college and they're subpar scientists. Well, I want to read you a couple more, and then I'm going to get into the agenda before the program's over. This is from Dennis Hollers. This is proof that global warming and climate change is absolutely a hoax. Dennis Hollers is an astrophysicist. He stated, what I do with the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, is put it in the trash because that's all it's worth. Carbon dioxide was an insignificant component of the Earth's atmosphere, and that rather than being the purveyor of doom, it is currently viewed as today, it is needed in order for plants to grow. You've been to biology class when you were in high school. Mars's atmosphere is about 95% CO2 and has no global warming. You hear that? Mars's atmosphere is 95% CO2 and has no global warming. Think about that. Bob Ashworth is a chemical engineer. He has 16 U.S. patents, and he's written 55 technical papers, and he was with the American Geophysical Union, and he authored a 2008 technical analysis of global warming. He stated, the lesson to the world here is when it comes to science, never blindly accept an explanation from a politician or scientists who have turned political for their own private gain. They've got their own agenda. Taxing carbon will have absolutely no beneficial effect on our climate, will hurt the economies of the world, and will be harmful to the production of food because less carbon dioxide means reduced plant growth. And this is only a few. Since 1998, more than 31,000 American scientists from diverse climate-related disciplines, including more than 9,000 with PhDs, have signed a public petition announcing their belief that there is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will in the foreseeable future cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. Including in this list are atmospheric physicists, botanists, geologists, oceanographers, and meteorologists. So these are not just some guys that they don't even know what they're talking about. We're talking about some of the leading people in this field in the world. Since these scientists are so credible and their facts have been spot on, disproving global warming and climate change, some global warming alarmists have actually proposed litigation to keep them from being able to tell the truth. That's right. Even though the science is settled and there is no debate, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democrat from Rhode Island, and a group of 20 professors have come up with a solution for what to do with these pesky skeptics who continue to question the theory of human-caused global climate change. put them all in jail. That's their solution. These so-called warmers want the Obama administration to prosecute global warming deniers, which is what I am, under the Anti-Mobster Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO, as if the skeptics are members of an organized crime syndicate. In other words, if skeptics can't be persuaded with facts and logic, the man-made global warming advocates propose that the only alternative is to threaten deniers with criminal prosecution. Also, to head off further debate, a leading lawyer has called for the International Court of Justice to decide that man is causing climate change. So they're looking to actually put them in jail if they deny this falsehood or these lies that these guys are spreading. One last quote from Martin Hertzberg, who was a retired U.S. Navy meteorologist. He stated, not only is it false that human activity has any significant effect on global warming or the weather in general, but for the record, global warming is over. The fear-mongering hysteria about human-caused global warming is completely unjustified and is totally counterproductive to our nation's essential needs and security. So, is this really climate concern or a global agenda? Why all the pressure and bullying? Could it be that the compulsion to conform is taking precedence over scientific debate or what's really true? Or could it be even more deceptive than that? Could it be that pushing a globalist political agenda is more important than actually understanding the extent to which human activity influences climate change? It has now become quite obvious that there is a purposeful distortion of truth concerning the global warming and climate change theory. The question is, why? Why would politicians, world leaders, scientists, and global dreamers, and even the Pope attempt to perpetrate an unproven belief system upon the human race that would result in bringing total revolution to the world? The agenda here, now this is the crux to the program, the agenda here is to force the world's population into complete compliance with a one world government. Let me give you a little history. After World War II, the United Nations was founded as an international organization to maintain peace and security by developing friendly relationships between nations and promoting social progress. The idea behind this institution sounded great until it was discovered that the charter establishing the UN was drafted by a convicted communist spy, Alger Hiss. He wrote their current charter with a communistic agenda driving the mechanics of the United Nations. It is easy to see how the global elites have been able to work from within the UN to quietly build a world governing body. A socialist world government is the goal of this entire thing, and promoting a belief in global warming is the number one vehicle to reach that goal. What was it that Bernie Sanders recently said? I am a democratic socialist. One of the core belief systems of socialism is that most conflict in society stems from an ever-broadening gap between the wealthy and the poor. You hear him talk about it all the time. The contention is that the wealthy are the ruling class and will inevitably use their economic power to enforce their will upon the less fortunate. The ultimate socialist solution to this problem is to abolish private property ownership, for the state to own the principal means of all production, with the central government redistributing wealth evenly among the masses. That's their solution. The result would be a classless, communistic society where a global government would ensure, now think about this, you've heard this in the news, equality. A lot of these people are talking about inequality. They want this one world governing body to ensure equality for all their citizens. It would be impossible to fully realize the dream of a communistic one world government or a socialistic without the redistribution of wealth from the developed nations to the poor, underdeveloped nations of the world. This is the main goal of the global warming and climate change hoax. The United Nations elites know that a perpetual global life-threatening crisis is necessary to convince wealthy nations to accept the punitive cost of cap and trade taxes. That's what helps with redistribution, or wealth redistribution. California has already passed and has implemented cap and trade legislation. What's the goal? Wealth redistribution is exactly what carbon cap and trade laws are designed to accomplish. The government will set a cap on the amount of carbon emissions that an industrialized nation can emit. If the limit is exceeded, carbon credits can be purchased from underdeveloped nations who have more credits than they have. The problem is that this doesn't solve the supposed climate change problem at all. It's all about wealth redistribution. Remember, we have proven conclusively that CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. Global warming fear-mongering is simply a scheme put together by global elites to redistribute the wealth of the world and to move us into world government. Global warming is only one of the messages being used to force the nations of the world into world government. Anytime you hear global governance propaganda like Agenda 21, sustainable development, nationalized health care, social justice, and national identification programs, think world government. But it is global warming. Well, I'm sorry, I meant climate change. I've got to maybe be politically correct here. Not really. That is presently the poster child being used to frighten everyone into giving up freedom in order to save the planet. I guess former governor of the state of Washington, Dixie Lee Ray, probably summed it up best when she said, the objective, clearly enunciated by the leaders of the UNCED, the United Nations Conference on Environmental and Development, is to bring about a change in the present system of independent nations. The future is to be world government with central planning by the United Nations. Fear of the environment crisis, whether real or not, is expected to lead to compliance. So, compliance to a communistic world governing body is the goal, and the global warming, climate change deception is the life-threatening crisis that the United Nations has chosen to get there. Remember the words of Mr. Obama, because climate change is not a hoax. Well, now you know that it is. Thankfully, for those who are paying attention, none of this is surprising, since the Bible prophesies the establishment of a world government just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. I want to thank you for joining me today, and make sure you educate yourself on every presidential candidate, know what they stand for, so that way you can vote responsibly about a year from now. We're going to help educate you all along the way so you can make the best decisions.
Politics and Religion is a production of Endtime Ministries. It is a daily 1-hour broadcast dedicated to bringing you the prophetic fulfillments happening on a daily basis.
If you would like to listen to archive shows, subscribe to Endtime Magazine, find a prophecy conference in your area, order Endtime resources, watch our TV show, or subscribe to our free weekly e-news, call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and take advantage of what our site has to offer.
Connect to Endtime Ministries by partnering with us and help this message make a global impact.
Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to all of our loyal partners, listeners, and friends for helping make Politics and Religion and Endtime Ministries possible.